Second clap, roll one, shot one, take one.
Fadlo Khuri, the first Lebanese-American president of the American University of Beirut. Time, path, journey, learning, home, homeland, roots, land, choice, freedom, mortality, immortality. Those above words are extracted from your speeches, from your interviews, from your writings, from your perspectives, and they carry a philosophical approach to the world as a whole, but also to the day-to-day matters. Today, we will be tackling several main themes and key messages, what proved to be timeless and what needed to change. In your first president perspective back in 2015, you said, "Back to the campus where I first learned how to ride a bicycle and to swim." And today you achieved a landmark that was reached by the founding father, President Daniel Bliss, and also President Howard Bliss and Bayer Dodge, in the first half of the university's history. What a long and strange trip it's been. What do you have to tell us here?
Thank you, Simon, and thanks for taking the time to do this. So that's a line from a Grateful Dead song called Truckin, just to say that life is wonderful, but always unpredictable. This is one of the few things I promised my wife when we got married. I said, I'm very reliable, but I'm unpredictable. And that's how life is. I can't say that I never expected to be back at AUB. I always hoped to be back at AUB. I always planned to be back at AUB. When that would be, I was not sure. I certainly didn't plan to come back before my 52nd birthday at a time when I had a broad research agenda and when my son, our middle child, was just entering his freshman year at Emory. It would have been nice to have that ability to take him to lunch since my dean's office was 5 minutes from his dorm room. But I have no regrets. I think that this is a unique institution. And as we're seeing today in higher education, the number of genuinely mission-oriented universities still standing and still adhering to the sense of being a mission-oriented university, a mission-oriented secular university, the number is diminishing. Things are being driven by power, by money, by rankings, by things that in the long run will not matter. So from my perspective, I think what's next is further evolution for AUB to become an even more mission-oriented institution, but one that can serve to transform the societies of the region and not just the futures of the individuals who educate here. Mm-hmm. On Main Gate, as you and I have noted many times, it quotes John 10:10 from the Bible, that they have life and may have it more abundantly. I want that they to mean societies. We do great at creating jobs and opportunities and wealth and companies, but I want us to help to transform the societies that we serve most intimately, meaning the peoples of Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, etc., now Cyprus, Egypt, and the rest of the Eastern Mediterranean. So that's what's next, I hope.
One of the main reasons you came back to AUB is that you felt you could make a difference at a time where there was a need for such a difference. If you look back to those 9 years, in retrospect, what are the differences you made? And if we look forward, what are the ones that you still want to make?
Sure. So when I came back, I felt that in higher education and at AUB, there was a problem of mission drift. In other words, AUB did research well, taught well, students graduated and they found jobs, we served the community, but we didn't really know why we did it. There was not that sense of the mission driving everything. And I had heard all too often in my work in the US that the margin drives the mission, something I strenuously disagree with. I believe it's the mission that drives the margin. And I think we're a more mission-oriented institution than we've been in a very long time. Mm-hmm. That I feel comfortable with. We are serving a much broader group of students and patients than we did, I would say, over the last 40, 50 years, maybe longer. we give more financial aid, we have broadened our spectrum of where we provide services. Now we have our first ever community hospital, we have our first ever twin campus. But the idea is that we are serving the mission. And that's one of the things that I think is critical. I think it's also critical that there's a lot more transparency. People know that we're moving towards an economy of scale where the community members, and I hope all of the community members, will feel at greater ease as to their and their families' future, both educationally, healthcare, and hopefully job-wise. And that will put them at ease to ask the very difficult questions in research, and that was part of restoring tenure, which is a critical aspect of what we did. So asking the really different and difficult questions, making our publications count instead of counting our publications, treating those who need us the most, but also graduating people who embrace citizenship of the world. As you and I have discussed, universities love the slogan, "We graduate leaders." Well, of course, AUB graduates leaders, but I want us to be about graduating citizens. And if I look at our interactions with the students and faculty and staff, I feel they've bought in much more to being citizens, not just of the institutions, but of their country, the region, and the world. So that's, on a large level, what I think has been the most transformative change.
It's very obvious for those who are on campus on a day-to-day basis. Everything you're discussing and everything you just said is very obvious in terms of the implementation and what's happening on a day-to-day basis. You once said these are some of the complexities that go with my job, and the decision I make or endorse, or the decisions, are not always comfortable ones. How this is a challenge, but also a reform of what is coming, and any particular examples that you can think of where confusion surfaced, but you still had to play a pivotal role in this regard?
I mean, there have been a number of areas that I think the decisions have been challenging ones, whether with delaying the expansion of the hospital wing in Beirut and having to subsequently lay off a significant number of people, whether launching the campus in Paphos or acquiring the Kisruan Medical Center, launching AUB Online, downsizing some programs, expanding others, expanding financial aid. As a leader, what you really want to do is to bring in a team of people who, even if they disagree with you, are not afraid to disagree with you, right? And to have the discussions, vigorous discussions, but respectful discussions. I think those discussions happen now, not just amongst the leadership of the university or the leadership and the board, but with the community. I mean, we have people very comfortable asking us difficult questions, asking about decisions. And that's the level of engagement you want. You want people to say, why are you opening a campus when we're short of medical equipment? Well, because we have to do both, right? We have to get medical equipment for our main hospital here, but we also have to diversify the care and the education we provide.
Yeah.
We don't have a choice to do A or B. We have to do A and
Both.
B and C, yes. And I think people have the right to ask, and they have the right to ask without feeling intimidated. And hopefully we've gotten past the initial awkwardness of any new leader when they start. I think this community likes to ask questions, but what I've noticed over time is that people ask questions to learn about your decision rather than to just register their position.
Yeah.
And that's the beginning. Those are the beginnings of a real dialogue. So some of the decisions I've made have been quite uncomfortable. Personnel changes, certain decisions we've had to take with respect to the governments that we deal with.
True.
Right? We have to stay true to the mission. We can't constrain freedom of speech. We also can't attack and embrace violence. That's not who we are as a university. At the same time, We've tried to allow the conversation to be as broad and as polarized, if need be, as possible, so people feel that they can genuinely debate the ideas here.
Yeah. Again, in your own words, you once said, I feel very differently about institutional legacies and have always chosen to study or work at institutions that are primarily mission-oriented. So the question here is, what is your reflection on the above statement? Or in other words, why AUB?
Sure. So I think the institutions that I've been fortunate to be part of, whether Yale or Columbia or the Boston City Hospital or MD Anderson Cancer Center and Emory, have also been largely mission-oriented. I'm not sure I felt that way when I was at Tufts, but it was an outstanding training program. But I feel AUB is the most mission-oriented institution.
There is something special about it.
It is something special. The only comparison is the Boston City Hospital, which was the public hospital for the people of Boston, and then it became amalgamated in Boston Medical Center, so that changed it a little bit after we left. From my perspective, the poisonous elixir of the great woman or the great man is what I call the legacy bug, the legacy virus. They start to think, how will I be remembered? What will people think of me in 50 years, 100 years? What will they say of me? That has not bothered me in my career. I've avoided institutions that are built around a specific individual. I've chosen an institution because I felt, one, it's mission-oriented, and two, there's an individual there, at least earlier in my career, who I think is a suitable mentor. I've seen far too many outstanding, accomplished leaders damage their personal legacy by becoming obsessed with it. I'm not worried about my personal legacy. I'm going to be dead by the time people start worrying about what they want to say to me. And frankly, even when I leave this position, I'm not one who especially listens to what others say. That's a waste of time. However, an institutional legacy is much more important.
Yeah.
Institutional legacy is, what does that institution offer and what has it offered over time? That's where AUB's legacy is transformative. It brought a nuanced American, Protestant, Western, liberal arts, research-based university to the Levant, and its impact was seen broadly throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, across the Arab world, and all the way east to Southeast Asia. Even one of our former AUB students was a Mao Zedong's physician and accompanied him on the Long March. So there is something about the institutional legacy of service here, institutional legacy of transformation. That has always been attractive to me, even as a boy, about AUB. I've always bought what AUB is and can be. I've never been cynical about that. It's fine to be sarcastic about different things. But for the people who are cynical, I think they hurt themselves. They waste a tremendous opportunity to see about the transformative power of this institution in creating opportunities for people who would otherwise not have these opportunities, and creating hope and understanding of the other rather than fear of the other. So that's the institutional legacy that I'm most interested in, not dollars and cents or buildings named after this one or that one, but really a legacy of human understanding, of citizenship, and of service for those less fortunate or with less opportunities.
In one of your past interviews, you said a great university has all sorts of people looking for the same thing. Does this apply to AUB or at AUB?
I think it applies very much to AUB and at AUB. Let me elaborate a little bit.
Sure.
Everyone here is on their own personal journey. Everyone is trying to find their place in the world. But they are trying, in general, to find a place in the world that has space for other people, for other cultures, for other points of view. You can't help it. If you come to AUB, these are the kinds of people that you will find. You won't find as many people who, even if they come here with blinders on. I want to be X, Y, and Z. I really have to pay attention to my grade, my community. I don't want to meet people who don't look like me. It has a way of breaking down barriers. So while people will still cluster with folks who have more in common with them background-wise, you'll see the barriers being broken between people, right?
Yeah.
The obstacles,
Yeah.
Rural, urban, Christian, Muslim, left, right, Shia, Sunni, whatever, Catholic, Orthodox, I should say here. Yeah. But beyond that, liberal, conservative, people learn something critical here. They learn to listen a little bit better. And I think listening is a vital quality of success for people. It's very underrated. In theory, universities teach you how to teach and present. But in practice, they also teach you how to listen.
To listen.
And not just to your professor, but sometimes to some of the softest voices in the room. I'm encouraged when I see faculty members asking us at the Senate, how do we better recognize signs of mental distress or mental health challenges in our students? How do we become better at that? When you see staff saying, I would like to make sure that students are safe, are well cared for, and they get home on time, and that they feel safe and happy here. When you see students organizing drives to support each other or staff members. So I do think there is that thing in common here, a sense that we have more in common than that which divides us, and that we can work across these artificial obstacles that may get in the way of our understanding that the context for who we are, we're not one thing. Our personalities, our characters are composites.
Fadlo Khuri, you're a physician by profession and specifically an oncologist. And you once said that every patient I see gives me some degree of clinical and biological insight. I don't believe in the idea, also in your own words, I don't believe in the idea that there are non-teaching patients. Yani, all the patients teach you something as a physician. So did this approach change in your role as a president of the top university of the region and of the Middle East, and how this was transformed?
Sure. So, I said this in response to the fact that in certain hospitals, in mostly private teaching hospitals, you have the teaching patients and the non-teaching patients. The non-teaching patients are seen to be routine patients or private patients of the attending. But I don't believe in this approach. I believe every patient has many lessons, even if they have something as seemingly boring as mild asthma or a sore throat. You can learn something from that individual, whether it's from the disease or the family history or the medical history or the physical exam. And I think the same is true for students and faculty and staff. No two people are identical. I think in dealing with challenges of students and programs and universities, you learn that every lesson is invaluable and informative for the next one, just like in clinical care. Science is wonderful, but you need some practice also. I've always felt that the intersection of the great physicians for many centuries has been the intersection of experience that comes from practice and from knowledge, from learning. Here we've had a lot of experience. These haven't been 9 quiet years. And I started to work for AUB in parallel to my fairly busy job at Emory from the minute that I had agreed with the board chair and vice chair that I would take this position. Of course, they could always have told me to go home had the board voted against it, which fortunately wasn't the case. But you keep learning from every encounter. How you apply it, because you can't possibly at any age pull out every encounter in a nicely collated way. Your brain doesn't work that way. But you have triggers that remind you of situations. This is part of human learning. And from my perspective, just like I've learned from every single patient that I've ever treated or interacted with, I've learned from every individual that I've met or talked to, positive or negative here. So I don't think that it's in me to ever check out of an encounter or just to say, this is a waste of time, I'm going to daydream. If I'm in a room, if I'm talking to someone, I don't want to take away the courtesy of listening to them or spend the time as some do looking at their watches. I want to learn from that person. So it has been applied here from my perspective.
Yeah. You say there are two major decisions to make in life, your family and your career. In family, even if we plan that, sometimes it doesn't work, unfortunately. But in the career part, what advice would you give to individuals who are striving to establish a career for themselves and for their future?
Well, I think, the family, it works, but sometimes in ways that you don't expect. I think that's the unsolicited
that's better
advice.
saying,
It's very hard to plan for things other than vacations and being able to pay for your kids' education and things like that. And even that, things can go awry. For the career, I can say I've seen too many great women and men who overplanned their career. What I call checkbox careerism. Age 40, professor. Age 45, in medicine, let's say, division chief. Age 50,
chair,
department chair. Age 55 to 57, dean. I didn't think that way. I will say that I thought of some places that I would like to work based on my experiences. I loved Columbia, and I had opportunities to go back there, didn't go back. I loved the Boston City Hospital, I loved AUB. Those were the three institutions that really resonated with me. That doesn't mean I didn't love Yale, but I didn't necessarily have an attraction or a feeling that I could make an impact going there. But I think to be too closely tied to where and what you want to do limits your horizons. Your horizons should always be based on what's most interesting and what's most challenging. I never had a plan, for example, to go to Atlanta for Emory, and it was, to my surprise, an even weaker clinical oncology and hematology program than I thought it would be. But when I left it, it was one of the clearly 25 or even 10 best in the US. And it was all based on the people. And had I not been willing to take that chance to go from one of the two premier cancer centers in the US and arguably in the world, in MD Anderson, and take a chance on building something at Emory, I would have missed that experience. Had I followed my career arc, I would have waited, gone to Columbia in a couple of years, and maybe BU, and then come back to AUB. Similarly, when I came here, it was much before I had ever planned to return to Lebanon. That was my opening argument with the board chair.
Okay.
I'm sure you can find someone better, because I'd like to come back in my late 50s or early 60s when I'll have even more experience to contribute. And Philip Khuri's answer was, no, we need you now. We need you now when you're full of vigor and energy, and I'm sure you'll be full of vigor and energy. So I think being open to possibilities that open up before you, as long as they're good cities for your family and for your life. Another piece of advice I would counsel people: don't go to a city where or a town where your life partner clearly is showing you discomfort, that they might not love to live there. And Lamia and I have had this discussion a few times, and I've turned down some places because it was obvious that she would struggle to love that particular place. So from that perspective, Beirut and New York have always been top of my personal bucket list. They're my two favorite cities in the world.
And Beirut and AUB specifically are home to you.
Yes. Well, I mean, for me, I had a conversation with another university president almost 2 decades ago who wanted me to come back in a different role to another university. And for me, with what AUB means to me, with what AUB has meant to and done for my family for 4 generations, AUB is the only place I can work in Lebanon. So yes, AUB is home as much as Lebanon, maybe more.
Yeah, صحيح. The university is home and sponsor of critiques, and it's not itself a critique. How do you draw the line between freedom of speech, neutrality, and safety?
So I've long been a believer in the Kelvin Commission's report. The Kelvin Commission was a committee that was founded and formed at the University of Chicago in the late 60s, and Harry Kelvin was a constitutional scholar. And it essentially arrived at a decision that the university shouldn't provide a commentary or a criticism of what's happening in America. Remember, in the late 60s, the Vietnam War and many other issues, drugs, other things were front of mind, but should encourage people to express their opinions no matter how extreme, as long as they were peaceful. Sometimes the university would have to step in circumstances of violence or incitement. I believe in that point of view, and I've tried to exercise it. There have been many opportunities for us to step in with our opinion this way or that, and I have tried to encourage a diversity of opinion. Sometimes the academy has, of late, become too politically correct, so that as the academy has swung to the left, it's become less and less tolerant of opinions to the right. Of course, I think that's a mistake, because I think we need to hear the full spectrum of opinions. Whether I agree with these folks or not is irrelevant. Our job is to create the space for them to discuss things. One of the challenges with that has been the evolution of academia over the last 5-6 decades, where it's become a bit of an arms race based on money. And you've seen, for example, in the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard University and others, that a small group of very wealthy donors have a disproportionate voice and forced out to university presidents whose presidencies were frankly in their infancy. We don't know what kind of president Liz McGill would have become at Penn, or even less so what Claudine Gay would have become at Harvard. From my perspective, it's important not just to keep the space for the internal donors, the internal voices, so that they can disagree, agree, but debate, discuss, hopefully in a reasonably respectful and safe, nonviolent manner, but also to keep those who feel they have a disproportionate influence because of their investment, because of their generosity, or because of their power in constraining that discussion or moving it in a certain direction. So from my perspective, now you're seeing pressure from the right that you used to see from the left. And it's not that we're in the center, right? So I've said this before, we're not neutral. University has a history that one has to respect. It's a history that dates back more than a century to Howard Bliss's embrace of the self-determination of the people of the Arab world, to Stephen Penrose's open embrace of the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination. That's AUB's history. Does that make us neutral? No, I don't think neutrality is our position. Our position is openness, but is also, frankly, to be willing to step up to protect our community on occasion. There have been periods where pressure has been put on one segment or another of our community, where we've had to push back, whether it's a politically oriented group or a sexually oriented group or gender group or other things. Our job is also to protect the most vulnerable, so their voice is heard. As I like to say, the quietest voice in the room, the most vulnerable voice in the room. So I don't think we can afford to be neutral in these situations. We always have to step up for those who are disadvantaged in a discussion.
Yeah. We're reaching the end of our chat, our discussion, and as I mentioned in the beginning, I mentioned your first perspective in 2015, and now this is your 100th president perspective. And you always quote artists and specifically singers in your perspectives, and this is not a classical perspective, and being classical is something you finely criticize sometimes. So my last question and the last comments will definitely be to you. What's coming next? What's for the future, Fadlo Khuri?
It's interesting to reflect that, while I love classical music, for example, Mozart in particular, I especially love Beethoven because he was a bridge to the Romantic era, the Romantic painters and musicians. It's hard to characterize him as classical. He was such an innovative musician and composer. For me, there's a lot about classical higher education that is superb. And I go back to a discussion I had on one of my walks with my then deans of arts and sciences and engineering and architecture, Nadia Sheikh and Alan Shahadi, where she remarked to the two of us, since we're test abolitionists, Alan and I don't find much value in the standardized test. She remarked that perhaps the extraordinary success of the AUB students is in part due to the intensity of the testing that our students undergo. Mm-hmm. Something for me to think about, because I've never particularly liked tests, standardized and otherwise, but you always have to believe your data as opposed to try to shape your data to your hypothesis. And there's some excellent evidence emerging from what are called the Ivy Plus universities, the 8 Ivy League universities plus Stanford, MIT, Duke, and others, where it's very interesting to find that within brackets, standardized testing is a better predictor of college and future employment success than grades. So what does that mean? It means standardized testing is very useful if you're looking at like to like, apples to apples. So if you're looking within an underprivileged African-American community, those kids who do exceptionally well in that cohort are going to do very well in college and going to do very well in life. It's a better prediction for them than school grades are, and similarly for kids who are coming from privileged schools. I'd like to think that what we're doing now is serving as a bridge to a new type of higher education. I don't want to define it as romantic higher education, but an experiential, more grounded form of higher education, where we go away from the classical, the great professor speaks, and these empty vessels of knowledge that some think the students are imbibe. We have extraordinary students, faculty, and staff, and we need to move to a much more participatory form of higher education. One where the experiential learning that's exemplified by, for example, Rabia Shibli's Center for Civic Engagement and Community Services, our fine athletics departments, all the opportunities to volunteer and to explore your passions, whether in music, sports, community service, or elsewhere, are part of the curriculum, and where even the courses themselves evolve. That's my hope from the educational perspective. From the healthcare perspective, I want to see us be affordable and reach out to far broader populations than has been our remit for the last 30-something years since the end of the Civil War. How we do that, it's not going to be easy. But eventually, I think this should be a university, small university, that can provide a great deal of value to everyone who really wants to reach into it. And with that, once that's done, once we've flexed the vital strategic plan, which was always intended to be nimble, then I think we can fade to black at that point.